Good morning and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Economy and Fair Work Committee. My name is Michelle Thompson. I'm the Deputy Convener because our usual convener, Daniel Johnson, has been unable to join us today. We've also got apologies from Sarah Boyack, and we have our former committee convener, Claire Baker, standing in for her. Welcome, Claire. And Lorna Slater's also given apologies. Now, this is our second session into artificial intelligence, and I'm delighted to welcome our witnesses. Stephen Greer, first of all, Industry Advisor and former Director at Microsoft. Professor Mark Schaffer, good morning, Heriot-Watt University and Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and Heather Thompson, the CEO of Data Lab. Now, I will start with some opening questions, but you've probably seen the format that I'll introduce colleagues to focus on the areas of interest to them as well. I wanted to open with, because moving on from last week was quite an optimistic session. We talked a lot about the opportunities, but today I wanted to start the session by asking about risks and getting a little more meat on the bones. Last week I had asked about black boxes. And, you know, we don't know what's going on in there. So I'd like to get a sense from the panel, and particularly aligned to both economic risks and risks for the public sector, what they see the critical ones are that we should get in a public record. And if I could start with yourself, Professor Schaffer, first, for obvious reasons.
Maybe obvious. It's a long list, and the risks are not just economy-wide. There are also risks for specific lines of work, specific businesses. So, for example, I'm a university lecturer. AI is not making our lives easier when it comes to education, actually, because now the methods that we were using for assessing students, we can't rely on so much anymore. So we have to change. We also have to teach our students how to use AI, appropriately. So lots of challenges. That's not going to be limited to education, of course. It's possible now. So you may have seen reports. I think, was it last week, beginning of this week, about someone's written a bot which enables someone to come up with coherent responses to a planning exercise, and so it makes it easier for people to engage in, I guess, participatory democracy. But that's going to create issues for how we manage this coming from voters and the population. It's the generative AI there, the experience from I guess the beginning of .com and the internet and so forth and big tech. I guess in retrospect, regulators would say that they didn't act quickly enough, and so we ended up with an industry which is dominated by very large companies. And which were enabled to ensconce themselves pretty early on without serious constraints. Now, this time around, regulators are more aware of this, but it's going to be hard to do. Now, there are also let's see. Oh gosh, maybe I could keep going. Should I keep going? Really?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. Yes. Another part of what's okay. Using AI agents is going to pose lots of problems or lots of challenges for businesses, because businesses will want to know that they're dealing with a genuine person. For example, someone might say they use their AI bot to try to make reservations at 3 or 4 different places, and then they go for the one which they like. They might not do that on their own. But they might have be happy doing that if they're using a bot. That's going to pose issues for businesses when they get requests. There are also risks for individuals who do this because they may be asked to supply, credit card details or a bank account. Okay, well, people are going to have to, want to trust that they're using agents that are not going to make, big mistakes. There's...
Yeah, and I can see what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's clearly a great deal, and I suspect as we go through the conversation there's going to be more that are brought out, but you've given some very useful examples already that we might not necessarily have thought of. Can I bring in yourself, Heather, to answer the same question?
Sure. So I think just building on what you were coming towards was trust. I think certainly in the public sector, but in private sector as well, I think one of the challenges we have, especially around public services, is that issue of public trust and the issue of transparency. When you talk about black boxes, people not understanding what's happening to their data, people not understanding, and actually when people talk about how do we gain public trust, a lot of the conversation seems to focus around what's happening to my data, but there isn't as much conversation about the opportunity there. So without pivoting the conversation away from risk, because I think it's very important, I think if we focus on messaging around privacy, GDPR, what's happening with it, but actually don't also communicate to people, this could change your life, this could have you in a hospital bed quicker than you need to, this could be a life-saving operation, that's the way to turn that into public trust. Actually, there's not enough being spoken about the real use cases and about the benefits. But that has to be very, very well balanced with the risk. And I think the main thing for me on risk is that transparency so that people understand. One of the challenges that we have with that is literacy. And so we're asking people to engage with systems that they don't understand. We're asking people of all ages, that you actually probably the young people are the ones that are best placed to engage with these systems. But when you're talking about elderly people who are now, they need to speak to somebody, they have a problem, and they are faced with an agent or a chatbot, they are not able to do that. So actually, there's a huge risk there in that they just won't bother and they won't ask for the help because they don't know what to do. So I think that kind of risk element around how can we ensure that services are working in the way in which they were designed to work. I think if you go back to, if another example, if we go back to the young people, while they are more tech savvy, there's a risk that they are now becoming over-reliant on the AI technology and they're not developing the critical skills that are needed. They use these systems and they just take whatever they get back. They don't actually challenge, they don't problem solve. Oh, we don't need to think about that, we just need to ask AI, we need to ask Alexa, we need to do this, we need to do that. So there's a risk that in introducing these systems from such a young age as well, that people get to a point in their lives where they don't actually have the life skills that are needed.
Stephen, do you want to come in?
Happily, yeah. Although I would have liked to have done the Optimus session.
No, I think we'll get on to that.
Yeah, I would really echo. I'd echo first of all Heather's point there, in that the challenge to critical thinking, especially for youngsters, and how that is challenged currently by the concept of my 15-year-old son saying, "I'll ask my AI."
Yeah.
Right, that is not developing critical thinking. Given my background, I think you may expect me to flip it slightly and say the biggest risk we have is that we don't move fast enough as a country. We don't adopt fast enough. We pontificate, we prevaricate, we don't move, and consequently we get left behind. From an economic perspective, there are risks to be managed. Some of them are, and I'm sure in the previous session they were covered, and they're very broadly covered in about 4 or 5 different current news articles this morning, and that is the impact of AI on certain types of job, especially the jobs that young people predominantly go into. I'm talking less about the service industry and more about the entry-level jobs into industry, where they're potentially basically coming into a job that has rudimentary rules, has administrative focus, and a lot of that is likely to be impacted by AI. A lot of and that, I think, for us as a country, is a risk, especially when we consider fair work, is one of the risks that we should address as soon as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm at the stage this morning ready to suggest what we do about it. Certainly, as the conversation evolves, I'd imagine that's where we'll go. Mm-hmm. So from an economic perspective, that's where I would be. To build on colleagues' responses, the risk is poor governance, bad actors, and over-reliance in inappropriate circumstances. There's various ways it can go wrong, as there has been with every technological advance in the last 120 years. The importance that we have the right guardrails, the right operating environments, the right people using it, that we trust the suppliers of it. The likelihood is that with an SMB-based economy, 90+% in Scotland, is that most organisations will consume their AI rather than build it. Do we trust those that provide that service? If you think about it as AI as a service, do we trust that? Are we, when we contract as businesses, when we contract with that service provider, are we happy that the legalities and the administration around that is what we would like to see? And I think Scotland has huge potential there because we are a very well governed, we're a safe environment. It's how we would want, I think, to market ourselves as an AI nation, is built around that solidity, around that trust. So I think we're well positioned to deal with some of the risks. Some of them they've been very well articulated by colleagues.
And before I bring in one of my colleagues, I think in my opening kind of framing, I can see you're correct in terms of society and trust. We could take a view in it, but we're an advanced economy in kind of all ways, and there will be bad faith actors, but we've seen this in other things. But my opening question really was the uncertainty around black box generative AI, where it will be much harder to track and capture some of these risks, and it could be very insidious depending how we're populating things. And we know we've got concerns about biases being built in. I know this is an area of your expertise, Professor Schaffer, but do we have a good enough sense of the kind of known unknowns, if you like, in that respect? I don't think anybody can say we do totally understand because of the exponential rate of change, but are there enough people who are worrying about this as a possibility and doing the thinking about it? Professor Schaffer, you're inclining your head, so I'll bring you just back in.
The last part of the question is hard. Are there enough people working on it? I don't know. A lot of people are. I think that's fair. I'm personally not massively worried about the fact that these are black boxes. These are very complex, incredibly complex items, 5 billion parameters, that kind of thing. And they inherently can't be analyzed the way we would analyze computer programs in the distant past, the previous millennium, when I actually learned my computer programming. They have to be analyzed more like we, deal with animal health and safety. Cattle are really complex biological beings, but we have, we manage. And I don't think the fact that we have to look at these AI models as objects where we have to feed them inputs and characterize them based on what comes out. I don't think that's inherently terribly new or challenging in principle. That's my personal take.
Yes, Helen.
No, I think for me, part of your question goes back to the understanding of the system, and actually from our perspective, and one of the things that's a foundational message as the AI hype continues, is that foundational message of the importance of data and the importance of understanding that the outputs that you're getting and a lot of the bias and the harms are going to be caused as a result of the data going into these systems. At the Data Lab, we've spent the last year conducting a piece of research around how to close the skills gap in Scotland, which has looked at what are the skills gaps currently, what are the skills gaps of the future. We surveyed over 500 businesses of all sizes across the public and private sector. And some of the results that have come back from that are very interesting around when you talk about the challenges of what goes into those systems, around the fact that, I'm just going to refer to my notes to get the numbers right here, but less than a quarter of business leaders in the private sector say that their organisation has a data strategy. However, this varies significantly by business size. 46% of public sector leaders say their organisation has a data strategy. When you go further into that research and you start to look at equality, diversity, inclusion initiatives, you start to see that those with a data strategy are the ones that understand the importance of diversity in building these systems. But when there's such a small percentage of these people that have a data strategy and so many people that are just experimenting, that's where a lot of the problems will come.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to bring in my colleague Stephen Kerr for the next theme. Stephen.
Thank you, Deputy. Stephen, you very quickly got to we need to go faster. That would be what you think we need to do. Just break that down for us. What does that actually mean for Scotland to go faster?
I think to start with, if we think about how AI is used currently, it's probably used in 3 ways. One is conversational AI. 2 is a business will almost customise its AI for a business use or purpose. And the 3rd one is essentially the massive one, which is looking at for perhaps biochemistry, predictive analytics in healthcare, for example. So if you look at it in those 3 ways, I think, first of all, we should provide the support and guidance that small business needs to comfortably adopt AI. And let's look, first of all, focus on productivity to start, because that's the easiestly attainable benefit from AI in the quickest way.
But we've been working on productivity in that sector of the economy for a very long time. Yeah. There's been all kinds of initiatives. None of them have really made a dent. So what are we going to do differently in order to bring AI to that set of businesses?
Yeah, so at the risk of solutioning it, right, the first thing I would do is make sure that those organisations have got access to people with the skills, and I don't mean skills in creating AI, this is skills in using AI, that they have that talent pipeline. If they don't have that talent pipeline coming in, then we need the ability to train them and skill them up and reskill them up through programmatic initiatives that are easily available, preferably free. So you want people to be able to get into, in a small business, to go in and say, I think there's something we do there that can be improved by, choose the AI of your choosing, by ChatGPT, by Anthropic, by Copilot, whatever that happens to be. So if you don't have that, then those businesses will continue to act as they did before. They will potentially become uncompetitive. Smaller businesses will be penalised more than bigger businesses, because bigger businesses have got the resources and the money to go and develop, to develop quicker. And then we create that inequality again. Well, somebody say that's business is business, but one of the things we need to do in terms of that productivity question is to act fast and make sure that people can quickly access the skills they need, so that they can progress. And once they are in that world of improving their productivity through AI, then that will, you would hope, progress to bigger and better things using the technology.
But isn't there a problem even more basic than this? Because many businesses will see these tools as a way of facilitating existing processes and ways of doing things. Because of, perhaps, and for understandable reasons, those business owners and operators, business leaders, may not have the vision as to how they can re-engineer their entire business. So simply making courses available to them, introducing them to tools,
It's a great
So,
point.
yeah.
The biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges I believe we have, is the leadership confidence in Scotland to make decisions like that. If I pivot slightly to the public sector, and I'll come back to SMB in a second.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I want to get on to public sector, so that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges we have is that leadership don't feel comfortable or with the pace of the technology. So if I was focusing development and skilling assets, now whether that be universities, colleges, apprenticeships, whatever that is, training courses, leadership is where I would go first. If we have leaders that are they don't feel comfortable in making the bold step forward on this technology, then we won't move and we'll lose competitiveness. So if I was sitting here with my piles of tenors, that's where it would be going. And I use that public sector AI is where has been essentially my passion for the last 10, 15 years. So I feel quite strongly about it. But giving leadership that confidence to make bold decisions, to move beyond pilots. I mean, there's bound to have been someone said we have more pilots than British Airways, right? It's, bringing those pilots to life, and this is both public sector and in business. How do we get them from pilot to production, right? Pilots fail quite often because we're not bold enough to roll it out across the whole country, or we're not bold enough to roll it out across a whole business. We will sit in small, we have pockets of utter brilliance in Scotland, absolute world-leading brilliance, right?
In the public sector?
In the public sector, yeah. If you take the work that Gerald Lipp's doing on breast cancer screening, that's, in my opinion, that's world-leading.
Yeah, and another example we've got of that is the AI colonoscopy programme, which has been running now for 3 years. I think, and that started out in NHS Highland as a small project. It was looking at how we could transform colonoscopy, moving away from the traditional method to a smart pill that's swallowed, much quicker, much less invasive, much earlier detection. That's been rolled out, started to be rolled out through a ScotCap programme, but then stopped. And the evidence of impact of that, again, it's in a pocket.
So why are there pockets? Why are these bright spots of excellence? And then,
so a lot of it comes down to where the funding comes from, I would say. I think so another example that we've got is our Data Skills for Work programme. So we were very fortunate through the Edinburgh City deal to receive money to run a Data Skills for Work programme. And part of that was a data and AI upskilling credit scheme. And it was built on the Singapore model, where every citizen in Singapore was given money for upskilling. So we had the money. We built our data and AI skills framework. This is where the papers come from. And over the last 4 years, we've upskilled 1,800 people at various levels to support them in retraining, moving. And the focus for that programme was on underrepresented groups and those whose roles were potentially at risk of redundancy as a result of AI. That's been a hugely successful programme.
how are you measuring that?
But because it was regional fundings, because we can track where these people end up, they end up in employment, they end up where they go afterwards. We can keep track of where they go. So it allows them to access roles. Like we talk about needing to upskill and retrain. How do we approach job displacement? By having upskilling and retraining opportunities for those who will be displaced.
But what about the point that Stephen makes about leadership?
Yeah.
He said he'd go first to leadership. You're rightly focusing on something you've done that has borne some fruit in terms of upskilling. But if there's a leadership blockage here, if there's a cultural reservation about making positive decisions about the adoption of technology, reprocessing, re-engineering the way we work, we won't get the productivity gains.
So I would say that maybe two separate points there. So I absolutely agree with what Stephen's saying, and that's why at the Data Lab our executive education is leadership that we focus on, because all of the research we've done, all of the market testing we've done, that's where we identify that there's a gap in leadership, also in governance as well with boards, and there is a huge need to educate and give leaders the confidence. It's the same in schools. Actually, we talk about schools and we think a lot about the pupils, but actually where we need to be focusing on is the teachers.
Yeah.
So that, I would say that's one point. I think as that conversation moved on to like how we do, why are things not happening?
Yeah.
Pilots, small pockets of funding, and the Data Skills for Work programme was an example of that. Was regional funding for Edinburgh, South East region. As a result of the success of that model, it was then rolled out into Tay cities through their city deal. But whilst it's great to have the opportunity to launch these initiatives as pilots through regional deals, and there are regional variations, and it helps us to get a better understanding of what's going on, they stay in the regions. So there's no reason why programmes like this shouldn't and couldn't be then rolled out nationally. We've proved that they're a success. How do we move them to a national rollout? And we've got, us and others, we've got shelves of examples of where that's happened, where money is invested, we run the programme for 6 months, and then there's no follow-on funding, so then it stops.
Right, so short-term.
Looking at short-term funding, and again, that was some of the policy recommendations that came out in the recent paper as well, about how do we look at multi-year funding for national programmes. I'm still trying
to get my head around the issue of changing the culture.
Yeah.
We got into the public sector very quickly. I'm particularly aware of the challenges we've got with public sector leadership culture. Stephen.
Yeah.
I would just add a point on the financial side of progressing boldly with AI. The expectation should always be that the business case stacks up, right? If the business case doesn't stack up, then why on earth would we be doing it, right? So we need to prove the gains. A challenge I would give back to the public sector in particular is that the business cases that are built on productivity and not on cashable savings don't progress anything like as fast as they should. So in my experience of presenting business cases to the public sector, if we go and say that a particular AI feature will free up 2 weeks of someone's time, right? Now, that I've pulled that from recent UK government testing and piloting generative AI. It was Microsoft's Copilot platform. They save 2 weeks a year from the pilot study. Now, in my experience, when we've gone and said, public sector, this is going to save you a load of time, they don't progress anything like the weighting that's given to saving money, i.e. I spent it this year, I don't spend it this year, rightly or wrongly, dominates business case processes in the public sector still. If we go back and say that we free up a week of a doctor's time across every doctor in Scotland, we should be jumping up and down to get that rolled out without question. For whatever reason we don't, again, I'm not going to solutionise it here, but I am going to say that for the public sector to make the best use of this technology, they really are going to have to look at productivity with parity of esteem of cashable savings.
I think that must be a lovely Microsoft word, solutionise. I've not come across...
It's taken me a while to cast aside my...
Microsoft's still deep in your heart there. I actually want to tempt you to be a bit more solutionising in the way you approach this, because I certainly think we as a parliamentary committee would be interested in specific actions that we could take in the public sector in order to jumpstart a change in that culture. So please feel free, solutionize away.
I'll be brief because I'm sure my colleagues have got much better informed views. Can I say this? I am at the risk of being incredibly overly simplistic, and I'm sure a chief financial officer of a public sector organisation would batter me for saying this, right? But even if we went and said, so if you expand on Gerald Lipp's work in the NHS, where his productivity gains and efficiency gains, he was essentially measuring in public sector consultant hours, right? At no point have I seen, and maybe it exists, right, But at no point have I seen someone take the average salary of a consultant, extrapolate it into the productivity, and give me a cash sum at the end that says we save, 10,000 hours of consultant time with this technology implementation, and the number we're going to use in the business case is 10,000 times the average cost to provide that resource as an employee of the public sector. I have never seen that. It may be erroneous and it may be completely disregarded in terms of a public sector structured business case, but I've never seen us attempt to do that, and I feel that we should.
And where have you seen that through your business experience?
Yeah.
Where have you seen that being used outside of Scotland?
It's used in the not even outside of Scotland, outside the public sector. It's used in commercial business cases all the time.
But it's public. But I'm meaning in public sector because, yes, the commercial world, completely different mindset about resource management and return on investment.
Yeah.
That doesn't prevail, in my experience, in the public sector too much.
Yeah.
Pockets, yeah. Where have you seen that adopted wholesale in the public sector? Because there will be lessons to be learned there that we can bring to Scotland.
I don't know, and it would be well worth finding out.
Right, okay. Heather, do you, with your experience, know of a similar situation?
So, just to clarify on your example of...
Yeah, what I'm saying is that we very rarely see when anyone goes to the public sector with a business case that says we'll save 1,000 hours a year, for example. I never see that 1,000 hours. I think it would be easier for the public sector to consume a business case based on that saving if we could put a numerical value on the 1,000 hours. One of the challenges is, and controversially, is that we never want to talk about people displacement. And that's obviously a factor. Is it actually a saving if those hours are not calculated? My preference is to look at those hours, especially if you're looking at in the NHS, is where is the redeployment, where are the waiting list times reduced, etc., etc. But if we needed to put a financial saving on that, or a financial redeployment within the NHS, then I would start to look at how we calculate those cases.
So one of the examples that we have of a project in the NHS that we've been involved in is with the William Quarriers Epilepsy Centre. And we were involved in a project which looked at predicting, measuring brain signals to predict when seizures were going to happen through the analysis of data. And by implementing the AI technologies, they were able to reduce the analysis time on that data from 12 hours to 3 seconds. So huge. If you think about the other work that they can be doing, the number of patients, the early detection, the time it takes back to have your diagnostics from x-rays. You go for an x-ray at the moment and you get that result in 6 weeks because the time it takes for that to happen. So NHS absolutely is the place to look for actually where it is happening and where time does make a massive difference and is accepted as being an impact.
There is one metric used in the NHSEC quite often, and that is the cost of hospital admission. Now, I've seen that used with AI use cases, actually quite an old one. Again, in Glasgow, pioneering early intervention for COPD patients was a very early AI data-led project. And in the construct of that project, they had the concept of saving individuals having to visit A&E, and they then replaced that AE cost with a much cheaper alternative, which was proactively sending a COPD carer to that person when they thought they were going to be in trouble. So instead of waiting for them to come to A&E, they were looking at a red, amber, green report that said that patient's in trouble, that patient's likely to come to A&E, we're going to send a COPD out to their house, or we're going to adjust their oxygen remotely so that we save the visit to A&E. Now, obviously, the focus on that was on the patient experience, far better. But there's a cost attached to visiting A&E. I can't confidently tell you that that was included in that particular case. Again, it would be well worth finding out. But again, there was very much that concept of talking about how costly a visit to A&E was versus the much more cost-effective option and better patient option of sending someone out proactively. So it does exist in places.
You're talking about calculating cost savings on the basis of budgets, but there's also the massive opportunity cost savings available by optimising the productivity, for example, of the health service.
Absolutely.
Which also should be part of the business case. You're really advocating that we overhaul our public sector procurement approach, right? To take on board
Absolutely,
the business case.
It needs to move with the times. Yeah, there are all challenges in the finance world around even how you pay and consume this for services. For example,
I'm being smiled at by the Deputy Convener. That usually is.
I'm not going to say
That there are lots of issues that come out of that.
I know there are, and we may well have time to come back to because
thanks.
there's some themes.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I wanted to bring in Kevin here for a quick supplementary before I bring in my colleague Gordon.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm really interested in some of the conversations that there have been around about Professor Gerald Lipp. I actually lodged a motion in Parliament earlier on this year around about his work. And some of that large-scale clinical trials using AI, and in particular the Gemini project, I believe has led to a situation where 12% more cancers were detected than in routine practice, which is quite incredible, really. And if we look at the cost aspect of all of that, we can look at that in budgetary terms, but we can also look at it in human cost terms. And surely that kind of advance is great for us all round. The human cost of an earlier a diagnosis is better for the patient, so the human cost of that illness is likely lessened. But if we look at it from a health economics or a societal economics perspective, that in itself, over the whole cost of, getting a diagnosis, getting treatment quicker, but likely leading to better outcomes, that means that person is fit, can be fit and healthy again and back to productivity. So my question is, I think we should be talking more of the Gerald Lipps of this world. Why is it that there are not more universities, hospitals, health boards looking at the kind of appointments that Gerald Lipp has in terms of the lead of artificial intelligence in clinical practice? Why are we not moving that on quicker? Why are we not using Gerald Lipp as an evangelist for all of this? Why are we not hearing more about this kind of work? Stephen?
Well, I think every point you've made there, Kevin, is absolutely right. I don't have heroes, but if I had one right now, Gerald would be right up there. In a clinical setting, extreme caution is rightly used. Gerald is a very strong ambassador for that. And again, I'll stand to be corrected, but I think he's now leading a similar exercise, certainly Scotland-wide, if not UK-wide. And I think he has been given an evangelist role, quite rightly so, in AI, in cancer screening technology, or indeed across the NHS. Why are we not doing it? I think I'll go back to leadership, confident, bold leadership, but we need to be assured in what we're doing. It's an incredibly delicate area. We'd want to be really sure. And I'm sure Gerald would love to see it moving much faster than it is. those numbers that you stated there, Kevin, are across a subset of scans only looking at breast cancer. If you extrapolate out to what I would unaffectionately call the big four, and look at it as a national, in the context of national screening programmes, the numbers are phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Going back to the question, I wish we could be more bold. Funding is always a challenge. Leadership is a challenge.
But again, sorry to interrupt, funding is always a challenge. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But the reality of all of this, the lessening of the human cost, but the savings here could be huge. If we are detecting illnesses quicker and treating people quicker, then the outcomes are likely to be much more positive, which means that that person becomes productive again quicker.
One last point. Well, how do we, as a government and a collection of public sector entities, manage to pass the savings from Gerald's study back into the economy to build an even more powerful business case? Right now, it's in the NHS. Right? There's no assignment of any kind that says that person will be more productive sooner, they'll be back in the workforce, they will not be claiming disability benefits or whatever that happens to be. There's no ability as a nation to look at nationwide cost justifications, in my view.
And that's because the UK is very backward in these regards, whereas health economics in other parts of the world are much more sophisticated in terms of looking at the whole life aspect of treatment. And there are other examples which I could give, but I won't, convener, because they're not AI related. But we have other examples of that in other areas. In reality, we've got Professor Lipp as that lead of artificial intelligence and clinical practice at the University of Aberdeen. We should have somebody doing a study of his work from the health economic side, which would build an even bigger case, I would say, for advancing the use of AI in our health services. I notice Heather wants to...
Professor Mark Schaffer was shaking his head vigorously at one of your...
Well, it wasn't that vigorous. But
I missed that.
I don't think health economics is particularly backward in the UK at all, really. I mean, the concepts required for measuring
So let me explain
well
myself, Professor Schaffer, because I'm not slagging health economists here, because I know a number of them, and I may well get myself into trouble. I'm basically saying that the politicians don't look holistically at all of the work of health economics.
Oh, I think that's fair. In international comparison, what the UK gets for the money it spends on health is, you can tell from my accent that I'm not originally from here. And if you look at, QALYs, quality adjusted life, years of life, if you look at what the US spends on health versus what it gets, it's absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
Now, it is at the technological frontier, so, there's a lot of money going in, and, this kind of research is being rolled out, I think, at a faster pace, but at the holistic level, it's really poor quality for money, whereas here, it's pretty good based on the resources going into it. But in international comparison, the resources going into it are pretty low. So you're getting really good quality for money, but the money that's going in is just not that big compared to, other countries.
Thank you for allowing me the supplementary, convener.
Thanks very much, convener. Good morning, panel. I thought I'd entered the health committee for a wee while there. So, listening to what you guys have been saying this morning, I've heard there's a question about trust, transparency, possible bad actors, over-reliance. It needs confidence and leadership. And I noted that the comment at the beginning about at the time of the birth of the internet, the regulators did not move quick enough. So What is the role for government in terms of AI? Anybody?
I think if you follow a lot of the conversation in this realm at the moment, it all starts at infrastructure. And that's a very complex issue. It's not one that I would claim to be an expert on. I think, but when you talk about the AI bubble, when you talk about the skills, when you talk about adoption, there's only so far that we will be able to go without having the right infrastructure in place. And there seems to be a lot of conversation, but not a lot of action by way of infrastructure progression. When you look at what's happening in other countries, when you look at even in the UK, as a result of their UK Opportunities Action Plan, the AI growth zones, we're waiting with our breath held as for an announcement on AI growth zone for Scotland. But that's not the be-all and end-all. You know, a growth zone will be an area, but there's other data centres that are looking to put down in Scotland. So I think there needs to be accelerated conversation and plans put into place around that. But again, as not an expert, there may be things that we're not aware of that happen behind the scenes. There's the skills aspect of that, which we've already spoken about. And I think that when you talk about how can we, what do we need to do? We need to go faster and we need to take this seriously. I think some of the other things, when we talk about international comparisons, funding will always be an issue, but levels of investment, I saw in the session from last week, we were talking about levels of funding for AI adoption programmes and things, and when you compare that to what's happening in other countries and other regions, we need to be taken seriously, we need to act seriously about this.
Stephen?
I think clearly you have a very tactical and long-term strategic role in the public sector. You know, you hold sway over that particular environment, and if we as a country are going to get the savings, the life savings and the productivity we need from that, then encouragement by government is massive. Get out the way when you need to get out the way, be supportive when you need to be supportive, and fund based on business cases that are productivity and cash savings, for example. Then we want to think about what do we want to be as a country. Do we want to be an adapter where we're going to simply encourage our businesses to adapt to AI, use them, you know, use it to remain competitive? Or are we going to be more bold as a country and say that we are going to be an AI centre globally? And if we are, what's our specialist area going to be? You know, and then look as a government and say, if we've got 4, 5, 6 key economic areas, as this committee will have, why are we not, given our, I'll choose something, right, given renewables, given our consideration that we are a global renewable expert, we're a superpower in renewable energy, would we look at ourselves right now and say that from academia and business, are we the AI experts on renewable energy? I suspect the answer's not. And then the next question is, why not? Right? So if we are going to focus on these particular economic areas and we're going to proactively fund them, we are going to say that we're incredibly good at them as a country, we are going to have to expand them. We're going to have to include the infrastructure of renewables, but behind that we're going to have to build the education and the academic and the skills environment that says, well, not only is Scotland producing renewables as a global leader, but we are building the AI renewable global centre of excellence. And what would that look like? So there are areas that we will not cover every single area of AI, right? But there are areas where Scotland is immensely strong. And the expectation would be that if we can build that, then we very soon would have international interest in what we do, and we would have the potential for attracting foreign investment into Scotland.
So we've talked a lot about the need to support and help grow AI, the use of AI, and make us a centre of excellence and so on. But is there a need for regulation, because there is an issue over quality, trust and probably even ethics? So, Mark, have you got a view on this, since you were the one that put the thought in my head at the beginning?
Yes, I did. I provided some evidence to the EU committee about 6 months ago when regulation came up, and it was related to regulatory frameworks for AI. Practically speaking, there are going to be a small number globally of large, wide-ranging regulatory regimes. There'll be one in the US, there's the EU one. The UK might be able to forge its own regulatory regime. Scotland on its own, it's too small, it's not going to happen. The issue is, one of the big issues is that things are moving really, really fast, and preparing a regulatory regime needs to take this into account. There's a really good, I have to read this out because it's just so wonderful. A Brief History of AI, this book was published in January 2021, and it has a list of problems, and there were 6 problems in the list of nowhere near solved. Understanding a story and asking questions about it, human-level automated translation, interpreting what is going on in a photograph, writing interesting stories, interpreting a work of art, human-level general intelligence. Now, 5 out of 6. We're there already. And Kevin Bryan, who's an economist at the University of Toronto, pointed out that the new EU AI regulation, the process of designing that was begun before this book was published. So they were designing a regulatory regime, way in advance of massive change. So what we want from a regulatory regime is one which is not extremely detailed and prescriptive, but gives regulators a lot of flexibility to deal with new problems as they arise. But they are. It's going to be needed. There's lots of issues now with, OpenAI is getting sued by a family in the US because the ChatGPT gave I don't need to go into details, but this is my point. You need this regulation, and it's important that people are, that we have it, but it has to allow for the new technology that needs room to experiment, but at the same time is flexible enough to deal with new issues as they arise, which we can't really foresee coming.
Yeah. So how do we get it right so that we don't stifle innovation? And is there any country that has gone down this path that is starting to get the regulation right?
I don't think it's country. I think it's supranational.
Right, okay.
There is the US. But the US is a federal system, and so individual states are trying to introduce their own AI regulation. So California is trying to do this. The UK is probably big enough to manage to implement something on its own, and so far as I understand it, the direction of travel is one where there's flexibility. It's not as prescriptive as in the EU, where I think there are actually, oh gosh, Heather's going to correct me. Didn't they specify something about the actual computing power, limits to actual computing power?
I think,
yeah, in the regulation, which is kind of crazy, really.
One of the challenges is going to be the structure of the Scottish economy. So when you're a predominantly SMB economy, then the likelihood is that you will consume, as I said at the start of the session, we will consume it as a service. You're then relying and you're putting your trust in the governance structures that have been agreed to the nearest macro level. So whether that's global, as Mark says, or EU or UK, and the providers of that service will adapt to the regulatory regimes that they operate in. That is, both a challenge and very useful if everything's going well. A challenge, perhaps, if it's not. It would be difficult for Scotland to to affect that, given the scale and the size of the businesses that own those services. So yeah, there's an element of trust being placed in more broad governance regimes. And again, we are well, in my view, we're well governed. I think there's a lot of awareness around the safety of AI, around trust and transparency, and we see them being worked out in right across the governmental landscape globally just now.
Okay.
I think that's where we have an opportunity as well. We talk about Scotland wants to become a leader in AI. Actually, what Scotland wants to do is become a leader in responsible AI, building upon the work that's been done to date through things like the AI Alliance, but the governance that you see in place at the moment. We have a platform on which to build, and actually already some of the conversations that some of our team are involved in are people in the US who are actually looking to Scotland as a route because they want to be part of an ecosystem that is working in a responsible way.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. Claire.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, panel, for this morning. I suppose I was thinking, your average person's understanding of their engagement with AI is trying to work out if the video on their phone is AI or not. And over the last 24 hours, yesterday on the radio, there's a story about animal testing, reducing animal testing, and AI was part of that solution. And this morning there was a report on the radio about the music industry and the pressure they're under from AI and the concerns that are there. So the examples that we began this morning within health, it feels like within health, AI is a tool. And I think most people can understand it's a tool in the sense that we would usually recognise a tool. So it's able to analyse information, give information quicker and be reliable. But that's only kind of part of the story, I think, of AI for most people. And so where do you want to say a bit more about where you think the legitimate concerns are, whether it's for sectors or whether it's for individuals? And is improving public understanding part of the solution here, or is actually the public's level of distrust or fear, is that at this point in time legitimate? So I don't know, do you want, Professor, would you like to come in? You kind of started in this area talking about students and about how difficult it is within universities.
Okay, I think we should distinguish different types of AI. And something that Heather said near the beginning about data is really important, because what goes into training in AI is depends very heavily on the data that it's fed, that it's trained on, and in science, it's you control what goes in, and what you get out of it is is clearly defined. And so, like with animal testing or molecular structures or designing drugs or in the health sector, it's pretty in a sense it's pretty straightforward. And the dangers are really, in my view, not huge, in the same way that they are when it's uncontrolled use of public data. So I don't think the and this distinction is of course the general public is not going to be thinking in these terms, but they are right to be worried about AI use and for example I think this morning I saw someone on X, formerly Twitter, asking whether or not the 2020 election in the U.S. presidential election was stolen, and Grok, which is the in-house AI, which is under the control of basically an individual, said yes, it was. Okay, this is really dangerous. This is really, really dangerous, and the public and the rest of us, everybody, should be really, really concerned about that. But that's different. That's different from, animal testing or designing drugs. It's just, it's a different thing. Sorry, that's.
And Heather, in terms of the work that you do you distinguish between the kind of two, there's maybe more than two, but the kind of broad ways in which AI is used? And when we think about the economy, we're just more focused on it as a tool and not so much thinking. I think next week we've got a panel with musicians and other people who might have more to say on copyright issues and those kind of things. But you as an organisation, is it more focused on how it can be used by businesses as a tool, or do you also engage with the kind of broader issues around interpretation or around how it can, the potential to mislead? Or
absolutely. I mean, part of what we've spoken about it today, and it was in the session last week as well, is part of our focus is around educating people. It's about helping people to understand the value, but actually going right back to not the value of AI, the value of their data, and what is the art of the possible with their data. And we won't even go near an AI system until we know the first question will be, what data do you have? What are you using it for? Is it in order to order? What is the quality of that data? And that is fundamentally one of the biggest challenges, is that people don't know. We've been in situations recently where we've had conversations with people who tell us, oh, we don't have any data in our organisation. And you're like, really? And then you go, so you don't collect any this? Oh, yeah, we do. Well, that's data. That is the level of literacy we can be dealing with from people who are using these tools, which is terrifying. I think as well, when you talk about like the tools, it's thinking about are there concerns? Yes, in bias as well. If people don't understand how these systems operate, so it doesn't matter whether it's a tool or a ChatGPT, it's all the data is what's being used. If people do not understand how these systems work, and that I was in a school classroom last week talking to children about this. You do a survey in class and you ask everybody, what's your favourite lunch? But you only ask the girls, you don't ask the boys, and then you put that through. And that's the sort of data that can be going into these systems. They can be no diversity, there can be gender bias, there can be all sorts of things that bias the results towards. But unless you are able to challenge and query what is the data set that's being used to get these results, then you're never going to know that. And I think for me, one of the key things that came out in the session last week was that you should never just use any of these things to take a final decision. They're there. The best use and the most impactful of use and the safest adoption of AI is human in the loop. It's there to augment our role quite significantly when you're talking in healthcare and you're talking about image diagnosis. There will be some further check in place. They won't have to go through every single image, but it's not just like, oh yeah, computer says yes, that's it. But that is the danger, and that is the legitimate concerns, is that right now, without the education about this, people are just accepting what comes out of these systems and they're not challenging it.
So. And Stephen, Professor Mark Schaefer talked about the election and about the use of videos or misleading videos. So business doesn't happen in a bubble. People who run businesses and SMEs don't just isolate themselves in their business. They will, they use their phones like anybody else does. And so they will see external influences. And I suppose there's potential for there to be, we talked about bad faith actors, for there to be, I suppose for businesses to think how it could be used negatively against them, whether that's through comments about their business or about, that happens more now, whether it's comments, or how do you kind of increase people's knowledge or understanding of that?
Some of that, I think, is an extension of...
I suppose just to add to that, because the government are coming up with the strategy, which I think has been delayed to spring now, an AI strategy, and seem to have a subgroup of industry members. It's very business focused. Do you think that's the right approach, or do you think it should be a bit broader about kind of the broader impact of AI on society?
Yeah, I would say definitely. And there's a couple of areas I would go with that question. We've always had to, at the risk of making this argument seem not as important as it is, Grok is simply the Times of 1925. You read it on the front page, you believed it. You choose your newspaper, we're nearly in that world, right? That's a very extreme example, but we've always had to take care of information we receive. We go back to the point we made in the very first 5 minutes. This is the absence of critical thinking is a danger. We're in long-term philosophical discussions about AI at this point. That ability to see, believe, act is dangerous. It was dangerous 100 years ago. It's dangerous now.
But it has become more difficult, I suppose, with the pace, because you would think, imagination would think you'd see animation, you can tell that's not true, but you see an actual person doing something.
Yeah.
To leap that that's not actually true. What your eyes are telling you is not true is quite a...
And you have the concept now of AI, policing AI. The only way we can police that is, is almost to have alternate AI engines verify it and look at it. There's lots and lots of technological progress around fingerprint of images and things like that, which is actually technology that's been about for a while. It has relevance in this age. That kind of reverse image look up to see if an image that you're seeing is real or is you're an actor from a different country, or that kind of thing. There's another slight angle I would take, which is slightly related, is that if we don't build that trust, we don't get the best of the technology. There's a trope that I've been wheeling out for 20 years that says, right, you're 50 times more likely to fill in a form to get 10% off in a big retail store than you are to give your information to the NHS to save your life, right? I used to use that as an example. I used to use my wife in it, but it became unacceptable for me to say my wife is more likely to do it. We have that cultural challenge, I think. I can't speak for other countries, but certainly in the UK we have. If that health information is not exactly as Heather was saying, if we don't have balance, if we don't have everyone, we don't have equality of that input, then we can't make national decisions on. Sorry to be back in the Health Committee again, Gordon, but we can't make national decisions on predictive healthcare if we've not got everyone's data. If there's a certain demographic of people who don't trust the system and they're excluded from those solutions, then we've failed and we don't get the best out of that, as you say, out of that tool, which has the potential to be incredibly impactful for us. So, yeah. No, go. Heather, go.
No, it was just picking up on your question about the AI strategy or the AI action plan, and the focus on business. So the Data Lab were involved in development of the AI strategy 5 years ago. The vision that came out of that AI strategy was for Scotland to become a leader in ethical, trustworthy and inclusive AI. At the point that that strategy was developed, 5 years, there's a lot has happened in 5 years. And at the point that that was developed, there was a sense of, like, what even is this thing? Is it coming to take over everything? And there was a lot of need to educate the public, to kind of settle, without even really thinking about the huge opportunity for business. Your question, should it be wider? Absolutely. I would say what's happened since the initial strategy was launched and now is that everything has evolved. So there was a question in last week's session, or there was a remark on last week's session about the fact that the existing AI strategy doesn't cover energy and renewables. At that point in time, I would argue that we weren't really thinking about the impact that AI would have and the need for data centres and infrastructure. So yes, absolutely, it needs to be more than business, but we are quickly realising the opportunity, and it's very important that we move now to grasp that opportunity or we will miss it. But for me, the ethical governance side of things doesn't get diluted. So it was very strong in the original strategy. It doesn't get diluted, but I've always come from the opinion of it should never be this bolt-on the side. Ethics is not something that you do your work and then you have this thing at the side that's the ethics. It should be embedded and ingrained into everything that we do. And going back to my point with Gordon earlier around, we have an opportunity to be known as a nation worldwide for responsible, reputable AI. There's an opportunity with a strategy to build that in, to focus on economic growth, but not to the detriment of civic society, not to the detriment of inclusion. How do we grasp that opportunity whilst minimising the risk? And that will involve us bringing in a whole lot of things that weren't in that initial strategy.
Could I ask one other brief question? It's linked to the head of statement there, sorry, thank you. It's just, yeah, if us being an ethical nation, we are a small country, can we produce an ethical approach to AI, given a lot of the content comes from out with Scotland, it's not generated in Scotland, it's not, how difficult is it for any country, and we're quite small, but any country really, to say that they will be an ethical AI provider or producer or user when so much of the content comes from outside?
Yeah, so I'll give a very brief answer and then I'll let others come in. I think it's about having frameworks in place. I think it's about people understanding. I feel a bit like a broken record here, but it's a lot about understanding the systems you're using, understanding where your data is going, which country is it going to, what are the frameworks there. It's also about when we talk about producers. So you have like the different parts of the model with AI, and we talk about homegrown AI. It's about understanding what the frameworks are that need to be put in place to ensure that there are standards that are followed at that point. So,
okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Either of you?
AI inputs are starting to be, well, basically it's like turning into a kind of commodity that's supplied, and there's markets for it. And it's possible, even for a small country or at even smaller levels, to regulate use of commodities. So in some sense, it's not influencing the supply side is a much different kettle of fish, because there you've got scale issues and international regulation and so forth. And for a small country to influence that would be really challenging. But in terms of use, it's being commoditized, and regulating that and putting in frameworks and ethics. I agree completely with Heather. Is not a bolt-on. That's feasible.
And there is ambition. I mean, if we go back to kind of the infrastructure piece, if Scotland gets itself to a point where we have the data set, we have the power that we need, we have the data centres, so that when the organisations are growing, the data is staying in the UK, that then becomes much easier for us to control and manage. And ultimately, that is the kind of the long-term vision, if you like, is how do we become a nation where we're not exporting our power down to the UK, we're not using other people's, other people's economy is not benefiting from the work that's been done in Scotland. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to bring in Murdo now, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. I wanted to go on and ask more about the issue about workforce and skills, but before I do that, I want to go back to any other discussion around the public sector and productivity. And there's a story on the front page of the Herald newspaper today that caught my eye, which is very relevant, which says that the head of the Scottish Public Pensions Agency is being summoned to this Parliament's Finance Committee to answer questions about the delays in providing compensation remedies for hundreds of thousands of public sector workers. This is to do with the compensation for unfair discrimination. And the SPPA had been given 18 months to give pension remedy statements to those affected. They've missed 2 deadlines, meaning that retired people are being locked out of their entitlement, and taxpayers are being cost millions more in interest, currently charged at 8% per year. I suppose my question is, why on earth are these processes being done manually by the SPPA in this day and age, and we're not using AI to do it? Stephen?
You're not using AI, Murdo. You're not using digital either, I suspect, in a lot of those cases. Yeah. We'll be looking at paper-based returns. Yeah. We'll be looking at claims being made through an antiquated process, an approval loop that's horrible. I am guessing here. I don't know the facts of that individual case. That is a massive frustration in the public sector. It's the most, in my view, the most promising area for huge productivity gains, for sure, because we have situations like that. We have huge paper-based processes that we are reliant on that should be digitised in the first instance, and then digitised, the data should be assembled in the right way. That is a data challenge. It's not an AI challenge.
Yeah.
That's a data challenge. And we clearly don't have the data in the right place, or we don't trust the data that we've assembled to fix that. You would imagine I'm trying to think of the right word, in the panacea that is AI driven, that is a matter of days, not a matter of months, if your data is in the right place and you have it and it's correct. Yeah, you make the case very eloquently there, and the Herald have made that case indirectly today, I would say.
They may think they're digital, but there's so many legacy systems in the public sector, and so in order to implement AI, the data needs to be in a machine-readable format, and so that in itself
I have
is a
some,
challenge.
I have some sympathy in that, though. You'll be going back records that are going back years and years before it was even possible to have them there,
absolutely.
and the investment will not have been able to be justified in digitising them. And that's a hump that we may have to get over. Many medical records are still, especially in the UK, Scotland has more of an advantage there, but many medical records are still held in paper format, and in actual fact AI is being used to digitise health records south of the border to enable them to come into this world. Yeah.
Maintaining legacy systems is incredibly expensive, and this is where government is different from business. Government has an obligation to maintain these things for much longer periods than private business. You only have to look as far back as the Windrush scandal, where lots of records were just tossed, and look what happened. Look what happened. But now digitizing them would have been incredibly expensive, and at the time maybe hard to justify. But look what happened.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's a bit of an aside, really, but it's quite interesting. As it was on the front page, I thought I would ask you about it. I want to talk about AI changing the nature of work and skills. I know we touched on this earlier, but I want to probe a little bit further. So I'm looking at a report that Microsoft did just on the 17th of October. It was published. Stephen, I don't know if you've seen this, called Work.
After my time.
Okay. Well, it's called Working with AI, Measuring the Applicability of Generative AI to Occupations. So it's quite a detailed and interesting report looking at effectively occupations where AI has the highest applicability and therefore is the largest threat potentially to people working in those sectors. So amongst the top 5 we have passenger attendants and sales representatives of services, as you might expect. Now, I can name, well, I won't name, but I know of at least one local high school I've been to which prides itself with its vocational training, providing youngsters with the skills to work in call centres doing sales type jobs, and that will be reflected right across Scotland. So I suppose my question is, have we got the right skills training available either in schools or further up the chain to equip young people, or not just young people, but people at any point in their career, with the skills that will not be made redundant by AI, and what should we be doing instead?
I guess I'm in the education sector, so it's not just to. We should these AI skills are going to be needed, right? It's not just that these people people will be replaced by AI, because as my colleagues were saying, you need that human element. So you need people to actually be trained to use how to use them and how to use it responsibly and sensibly and so forth. And that gives you your productivity gains too. So I think the question is it should be, are we equipping our students at the school level and university level with the appropriate skills to manage these new tools? And it's starting to happen, but it's taking a while. And I think in the in the education sector generally, the first perception of it was that it's a threat to the way we teach. And I mentioned that at the beginning, and in some sense it is. But as educators, we have a responsibility, not just a responsibility, to teach our students how to go out into the world, knowing how to use these tools. And it's a moving target, so it's really hard. But it's happening. Maybe not fast enough, but it's happening. Yes.
So,
Did I get myself in trouble?
Yeah, prior to being CEO in the Data Lab, I came in leading their skills programme for the last 7 years. So I've seen a lot. I also have 2 young children, one in primary school, one in secondary school. And one of the things that is, to me, I just can't understand is the pockets. Like we talk about pockets of opportunity and pockets of innovation, but actually pockets and inconsistencies in what is being taught to the students, depending on what school. And actually, it's not even regionally, like schools in the same town, and the opportunities that they have based on the way that the curriculum is set with the curriculum of excellence, and that they then have that freedom to teach. These are the outcomes we need to meet. But when you have I'm not even going to try to remember the number, but the number of schools, secondary schools in Scotland that don't have computing teachers, that is a massive problem. And then the actual curriculum, how we change that curriculum, how do we bring industry in to help the schools understand these are the skills that they need. And actually, the technical skills are important, but what's more important are the critical thinking, the problem solving, the team working, and that can be taught in any subject. And so from a skills perspective, as I was talking about ethics earlier, I've always tried to be an ambassador for how do we embed these skills into everything that we do. Prior to working with the Data Lab, I worked for part of the university, which was around how do we help to increase the quantitative skills of social scientists, because quite often the social scientists are the people who go for these subjects in university because they maybe haven't been good, they've not been good at maths. No, we're not good at maths, so actually we go towards the more social subjects and then spend a lot of time focused on qualitative research, and then they come to work in policy and then they start to understand actually, well, how do you evidence that? Where are the numbers? Where are the statistics? And from a schools perspective, it's like, instead of, yes, having not the computing teachers that we need is a huge problem, but also how do we equip teachers in every subject to understand that data is everywhere, numbers are everywhere, AI is everywhere. And so how do we embed that into the learning so that it just becomes part of everyday life? It's not even about working for a job now, it's about your daily lives. How do we teach people, citizens, to be able to function in today's life? And I think that quite often in schools things are taught without a context. So I went into a school last week to talk to a group of 9 and 10-year-olds about data and AI, and they'd spent a term doing data. And so we say, well, what is it you've learned about data? And they say, bar graphs, line graphs, spreadsheets. And you say, do you understand why? Do you understand the importance of these skills in everyday life? Do you understand the opportunities that await you, some of which we don't even know yet? But actually, going into them, I didn't talk to them about data. I talked to them about the opportunities, the context, actually brought these subjects to life. How do we excite people about this? For me, the opportunities that are available to young people now, when you look at the graduate apprenticeships, the modern apprenticeships, the fact that you can go into a university and get paid to do a job at the same time, I'm not sure I would try and convince any of my children to go and just do a standard university degree. But there just seems to not be that consistency, and it seems to be out of date. And I think one of the challenges is things evolve so quickly. So some of the work that we've done with universities around curriculum for data science and data engineers is that we can bring industry advisory boards together, we can understand the needs, but the time it takes for it to then influence and get into the curriculum, by the time it's there, it's already out of date. So that's a huge challenge as well.
And I think that's where, exactly as Heather said, that's where we rise up a level and we take the 4 constituent pillars of curriculum for excellence and say, if we get that part right, then those skills can be used in the world of AI. Computing, the computing challenge is horrible. There's some things that that we really have to fix there. I'd be, be interested in Willie's view. There's some challenges that that we have around the image and perception of computing in schools. I am an advocate for the abolishment of the word computing. I don't think there's a bigger turn-off, particularly for young females coming into industry, than the image of computing. There has been, by Skills Development Scotland and other bodies, work done to improve that, to change. There's some interesting anecdotes I can give you about changing the name of a class from computing to digital design and having quadruple the number of, in quotes, applicants for that particular class, just by some semantics and some marketing around what is a hugely exciting creative profession, which has been augmented by now the potential for AI. Going back to your original question, what do we do about the fact that we are training people in schools to be in call centre jobs that may not actually be there? I don't profess to offer, as I said at the start, the solution for that. Reskilling, retraining, repivoting, education on the use of AI, so that when you do go into a job, the first thing you're thinking is, how can I make this better? How can I use the AI to make what we do more quicker, faster, more profitable, less impactful from our perspective? So I think, exactly as Heather says, we do need a way to move more quickly. Yeah. We shouldn't be sitting there with out-of-date teaching materials and content. We should think about, from a computing perspective, how much we... This goes back to the thing about teaching fundamentals of computing versus actually most people will simply use a service. If you look now about how do I build an application, right? I'm going to go to something like others are available. I'm going to go to GitHub Copilot. I'm going to assemble it, and I'm going to ask the AI to write my customer service tool for me. Then I'm going to plug some agentic AI into it so that that can deal with the requests when they come in, pivot based on the data it gets, do the next one, pass it on to the next AI agent, and I'm going to be able to do that massively quickly. So it's... We, as a society, have to decide whether we need to teach the fundamentals of computing. I think we do, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that that world of application and systems creation has changed beyond recognition. Beyond recognition.
Can I ask one more question? My colleague wants to come in, and that's fascinating what you're saying. Did I see, Stephen, you recently joined the board of Scottish Funding Council? Is that right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, although I must put my hand up and say I'm an unaffiliated resource for you today. So yes,
no, that's fine. But
yeah.
There is an opportunity. I mean, that's good to know that they're, they're hopefully leaning on your knowledge and expertise in this area. I've got one more question, if I can, Convener. Going back to this Microsoft report looking at occupations. Interested and a little bit concerned to see that in the top 5 occupations where AI would have the biggest impact included historians and writers and authors. So I declare an interest in both categories. Is there a risk then that human creativity will be squeezed out by AI? If this report is saying, authors, historians, they're the jobs that are going to be squeezed out. What does that mean?
If you're asking, are there really serious implications for creators in the creative space? Oh, yes. Okay. Absolutely. I mean, we're even seeing, digital music, getting generated by AI and being, popular. And so, yes, it's going to be harder for people in certain sectors, and the creative sector is the one that we're talking about now, but others, to maintain a living. But entirely squeezed out, I don't think we're at that yet. Can I just add, your previous question, I just want to say that everything that we said applies to university education as well. We should expect all our university graduates to be literate, and we should expect all of them, whatever the discipline, to be digitally literate too. I think we should expect that. But sorry, I'm digressing.
That's right.
I've not really got anything to add to that, but one thing, I can share this afterwards, may be of interest, that just this week, the University of Southampton published a series of essays about AI in universities and the impact and the implications. And part of the research that they're doing, one of the essays has been written by ChatGPT, and it's there for people to review and comment and compare. And so that might be an interesting approach for you. I can share that.
Okay, thank you.
I think when I don't know the context of the report, as I did a self-imposed media blackout for a month in my camper van. But if I thought about a historian, I would, I'd be interested to read the context of the report. I think the potential for AI as a tool for a historian must be so exciting. It must be so exciting currently, building patterns and correlations between data that we've not realised before. I can't think of anything more exciting. I'm not meaning to put a positive spin on what I suspect is a concerning aspect of that report, but that's where I'd be so focused and excited about that. I think you will have better answers, I think, on not that those weren't brilliant, I didn't mean that. But if you've got some artists and creatives at the next session, you're going to feel they are going to, I think, going to voice their concerns very vocally, I would imagine.
Yeah. And just for that augmentation perspective, I think going back to writers and authors, where it can absolutely pay dividends is in helping people to write. So how do we structure? How do we review? How do we proofread? How do we actually taking someone through that writing process? Absolutely. But when it comes to replacing, I'm not so sure. I'm not sure I would want to read something that it doesn't. To me, it feels like it wouldn't have the emotion, and you wouldn't actually be able to get as involved in it as you do reading a book. So that's just a perception of mine.
It's hard. I think a view from having a 15-year-old son who lives in this world is, I don't know whether, when I see the use of AI to pull in information you wouldn't otherwise have. So again, as a research tool, nothing, presuming that, as Mark said, is that we trust in what we're reading and we're not deceived, or how exciting. And I don't know whether I can't decide whether to be alarmed or super happy about that. But he is accessing information he wouldn't ordinarily have, and he's building correlations and coming to assumptions and theories based on information he potentially wouldn't have outside of previously a textbook, then the internet, and now something curated for him by AI. It's a glib statement. It's incredibly interesting, fascinating, actually.
Yeah, Mark.
Just to emphasise what Stephen was saying about historians, I see this in my discipline. Economic history is a growth area, and economists are normally equipped with numeracy and digital skills. So if you're an economist working in economic history and lots of stuff is getting digitized, more and more stuff is getting digitized, it's fantastic opportunity. So so historians who are digitally literate are going to be doing really well. Now, there may not be demand for so many historians doing, who are digital in the future as now. That's entirely different. But in terms of productivity of historians, there's, massive opportunities actually.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Our final question of the day, Willie.
Conveners, good morning everybody. What a fantastic conversation again, and maybe start where Stephen ended a wee while ago with the computing idea. It's really perplexed everyone for many years about how to encourage and keep younger girls in science, and we don't know the answer. Don't know the answer, I have to admit that as well, but it seems to be when they transition from primary to secondary, they seem to lose interest in science. It's almost as though computing particularly becomes almost akin to the oily rag thing, isn't it? It's mechanics, it's engineering, software engineering, computing, and it seems to turn young girls off. Sarah Ronald, I think it was last week, was talking about it in her company, where they seem to focus on having younger girls or younger women doing some of the softer data analytics, really excelling at that and liking that side of computing science, whereas the younger guys like to be the coders and the programmers. I don't know how true that is, convener, but that was her experience. So if there's a magic wand about how to persuade more younger women to stick with computing, whether we call it digital design, Stephen, would be a fantastic idea, I think.
It's been a passion of mine for a number of years, is what we do about that. There are better people more qualified to talk about it than me. Getting Tony Scullion from Dress Code to come and talk about how she sees it, and far more qualified than me. I do believe there's some semantics, some marketing. If you look at the creativity that's possible, driven by the digital world, you can't understand why. We're obviously doing something wrong. The illusion of a spotty youth, usually male, being fed pizza under the door, gaming till their eyes are blacker than soot. That seems to be where being deliberately humanistic, but that seems to presents a challenge. That is, I think, sometimes the image that it has, and where we need to work to improve it. And I think that there is certainly some work that could be done there. Why I'm not the best person to talk about it. There's some really interesting work done by Skills Development Scotland in their Gender Commission, which looked at encouraging or levelling up in both industries where young males were not coming into, for example, care, versus industries like engineering and digital, where there was still a challenge. There's some really interesting work done there from an apprenticeship perspective that's well worth reading, around things that companies can do to try and fix some of that. But yeah, open to the rest of the panel.
It's an observation, really. I remember convener showing this thing to my daughter years ago, and wouldn't you like to be able to program and control these? I think no.
Just want to use it.
Just want to use it. Just values the functionality of this thing, but wasn't really interested in how it's designed and how it comes together and how powerful it can be as a tool for you. Just wanted to be an end user of it. I don't know how representative that
is. I think one thing that one niche point is that when you look at Minecraft in particular, that particular game or ecosystem has quite good gender balance, and that's an anomaly, because that's usually creative. That is just about that encourages just about everything you would want. Why is it that we have that up to a certain, as you say, age point, and then suddenly we don't seem to be able to develop from that point?
Okay, I'll move from. Sorry,
onto that, just
absolutely.
So I've come from a background where I was a computer science graduate. I was one of three females in a class of 80, and by the end of first year I was the only female. I then moved into industry, working in the utility sector and then the offshore sector. So have come through in very male-dominated environments, and actually having spent so much of my time in those environments, when I came into the university, into the data lab, and got more involved in the kind of diversity in tech, it actually was a surprise to me because I'd been so ingrained and embedded with it that I didn't really see the anomaly. But as time's gone on, I've actually learned and reflected on the impact that had on me and the way that I changed to make myself fit into that situation. So it's been a really, really interesting journey for me. I think for the, how do we get people involved? Last week I attended the Scottish Women in Technology Awards. Like, you've not been in a room that, like, so inspiring. There was people there, a young lady there from JP Morgan, 25 years old, collecting an award. She's already sitting on governance and advisory boards. But the old saying is, like, you can't be what you can't see. How do we spotlight? How do we use mentorship as a hugely, hugely impactful scheme? I've been involved in the Dell run a STEM Aspire scheme, where every year they take in undergraduates and college students, female college students, and they assign them mentors. And having been involved in that, it's really interesting to understand the levels of imposter syndrome, the challenges that people feel just even in walking into a room in those scenarios. I think some of the cultures associated with those kind of male-dominated sectors around people feeling awkward and feeling like they don't fit in. And also, as you were talking about there, and we spoke about earlier, was the jargon. So actually in schools and in universities when we're teaching, quite often some of the terminology that can be used, as soon as you put the word computing or the other word is engineering, people just switch off. So how do we think about creating more inclusive learning environments for people where they don't feel like, well, that's for men and that's for women, and actually this is for everybody.
Wise message.
Yeah.
Mark?
Just speculation. We were discussing earlier digital literacy at schools and universities, and if something is a requirement and everybody goes through it, then it's a kind of leveling of the playing field, and that may help. That's all.
Good. What I really wanted to talk about was ethics, and it always creeps into the conversation. We get there eventually, I think, to talk about ethics and how and whether it can be, should be, or is embedded at the heart of this AI revolution. And I scribbled down what you said earlier, Heather. You said it should be embedded in this whole world. How can it be? I mean, if you said in your opening remarks, Mark, that in the early days the corporates grabbed this whole agenda and ensconced themselves at an early stage. They weren't thinking about ethical standards. They're thinking about profit and control and influence and all of that. So is it really something we can embed? Or is it some kind of protective blanket we have to throw around it by governance or regulation or whatever to ensure that it is indeed at the heart of this revolution? I'd be really pleased to hear your thoughts on how we do that. You started it, Heather, so
So
I've never seen an ethical computer algorithm yet.
yeah, but
Is
what
there
you,
one?
yeah,
Ethical algorithm?
yeah, but what you have,
really?
but
Have you?
then it goes back to that conversation of bad actors
Okay.
and actually the human influence from an ethics perspective. There's input to these systems, and so the ethics around people that influence those systems, if there are frameworks in place, is there moral, there's a factor of morality there. I think that it's very hard to do it. I think when we talk about the balance of regulation against non-regulation and the balance of ethics versus innovation, it's very hard to do that without having frameworks and guidance in place. So I think that is important. We've been involved in conversations recently where we talk about schemes whereby it's almost incentives for people around whether that be their access to the compute that they need, or actually, because one of the questions I'm involved quite a lot just now in conversations with data centres, and one of the questions I ask them is like, what are your ethics controls that you have in place? How do you know what is being used, what your compute is being used for, and how does that impact your reputation? So for me, it's not just one person's responsibility, it's a whole chain of responsibility. It's about people coming together in the ecosystem to agree that actually this is what we want for Scotland. You're never going to get rid of the bad actors. But that doesn't mean that as a conglomerative, if you like, if by coming together we can agree these are the guidelines that we will follow, this is what we want Scotland to be known for. I think that from a educational perspective, again, teaching ethics and governance from a school age as well, so it's built in, it's not just something that's an add-on, and it's, for me, it's about when someone is designing a system or they're interacting with a system, it's not about designing the system and then going, okay, how do we make this ethical? It's about thinking about it as a holistic problem and making those important considerations. It's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
Ethics in coding and designing AI systems is well, what's an example? Mortgage applications, credit scoring. We have things which we have protected characteristics.
Yeah.
These go into databases. Should we train AIs that that can actually make predictions, including a protected characteristic is associated with lower probability of repaying the loan? Well, you're less likely to get a loan. That's not ethical. Okay, and that ethics get built in straight away. Facial recognition. If you train your AI, your facial recognition AI on a population which is predominantly pale, it's going to struggle when trying to recognize faces which are not. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, okay, you can train it on a representative sample. Well, actually, there are minorities. That means there are going to be minorities whose face is not going to get recognized. Okay, so ethical considerations in designing the algorithms are all over. So that's why I was nodding vigorously when Heather said it needs to be. It's not a bolt-on.
But is it more of a voluntary thing that some sections of society actually decide that they're going to engage in that way? Or does it need to be some kind of overarching framework that everyone should observe? I mean, you mentioned Grok earlier, right? Is there an ethical component to that?
There's this wonderful little internet meme of the little girl going like this and saying, "Why not both?" Yeah, it's all over. And so it's much now. This is a Scottish Parliament committee, and so we're talking about regulation of businesses, but also consumer. We're talking about everything. It's hard for a small country to influence design of the algorithms used by the behemoths. It's a lot easier to influence the design of algorithms used by local businesses, and it's also a lot easier to talk about educating people on how to use these things ethically and also how to interpret them okay.
David?
We've talked a lot about readiness and skills. I think the foundation, as Heather said, is we should, if we are going to be an ethical AI nation, then we should embed that as early as we can, so that those that are working, as I go back to my example I made earlier, if we're going to be the AI centre of excellence for what we consider to be our key economic priorities, then the reputation we have should be that we are ethical in how we go about doing that, and we get that reputation. We control what we control, so if we are going to embark on, for example, an NHS data set, or we're going to use it, then we have control over that. We are then going to use that. We might use a tool, a ChatGPT, an Anthropic, Copilot, whatever it happens to be, but we will pull that data into that tool and we have to trust that we can do that properly. So we're controlling what we control, then we ask good governance from those tools that we will ultimately, the majority of us will end up using. I think that's practically that is as much as we can do as a small country.
Lastly from me, Michelle, it was education is also mentioned by a number of colleagues around the table, and I wanted to just see what you thought about the direction of travel if there's an AI component within education. And our friends at the Turing Institute in the briefing paper we got were telling us that 49% of the time spent on activities in education could be better supported using generative AI tools. And so could I invite you just to gaze a little bit forward and see what does education look like in the future, the immediate future, if AI becomes more embedded as a tool for learners and also for teachers and the kind of activities that we are traditionally used to engaging with in education? What might it become if deployed sensibly and ethically in the education setting?
Well, there's a lot of scope, but for example, students, I'm speaking at the university level, but I guess it works at schools as well. Students learn well when they interact with teachers. But the level at which they interact can sometimes be like, really basic stuff. But nevertheless, they learn from the interaction. It's possible to automate that. There are now commercially available tools for education tools where you can train the AI on a particular body of material, and then give it and then the student has questions, and it assembles answers. They're right, wrong, but there's also potential for interaction between the student and the AI. That's just one example. There's a lot of scope in education, but there's also a lot of challenges. As I mentioned, we're having to change the way we assess, and we're going to have to really radically. We may have to go back to the medieval viva era, where you have to discuss interactively with another human being what you've done and how do you explain it and so forth. And I'm totally okay with that. And if that involves saying how did you assemble this body of work, explain what you used as the prompts for the AI, how did you stress test it, how did you and so forth. And then I'm totally okay with that myself. I'm not sure about many of my colleagues.
Yeah.
I think your answer there focused a lot on the kind of student perspective. I think going back to that need to support the teachers, I think that can be a massive asset there. And we all know that teachers have, and university lecturers, college lecturers have such significant workloads under a lot of pressure. How can we support them through AI to become more innovative in their teaching? They can use it for writing lesson plans, for bringing in ideas and actually contextualising some of that learning by using it to identify case studies, new activities, interactive activities, actually bringing lessons to life by using AI. I think there's I talked earlier about the Data Skills for Work programme. That's one of 4 streams as part of the Data Driven Innovation Skills Gateway. There's also a stream there, Data Education in Schools. It's led out of Murray House at University of Edinburgh, and they've done some phenomenal work with some of the schools, particularly one in Midlothian as well, around how we introduce AI into education, taking in some of the sensors and the microbits, helping them to understand how could we contribute, how could our school contribute towards net zero by putting solar panels on our roof. What would the cost savings of that be? What would that be? So actually just bringing in, like, okay, let's go and get some data from NASA, bringing some excitement into it. So.
Stephen, last word.
Not a lot to add. I think the challenge has become because if we had AI as a research tool, we'd be so excited. The kids and the young people would be so empowered by that. The challenge has been that AI creates, and then we go back to the I think at the core of what Mark was saying was that good old show you're working? And how do we make sure that young people in schools still have that concept of show you're working? I've not just copied this, generated it from me. Even if I've learned from the process of researching on AI, let's look at can we explain the theory, and how do we then assess that in some modern, progressive way?
That's how it will work in the workplace.
Yeah.
Do you think the pupils of the future will have their own personalised AI bots that look after their educational development journey for them individually?
In a way, I think what we will see, and I hope we see, is AI being used to spot areas of inequality within education, to spot attainment challenges, and us then be able to use that evidential data to say, actually, here are the interventions that we must make. And I am excited by linking that to, dare I say it, linking it to demographics, health records, and then being able to create a profile for that child that says, here is your ideal learning environment, your learning style. And that's what I'm hoping that AI brings to education, is that real individual focus on the learner, tuned to them, not, and there's nothing wrong in my view of how we've done it so far, but that kind of, we create, it gets discussed in education forums all the time, are we creating just loads of little clones with various different levels of ability by teaching them the same thing? That personalised learning potential driven by this technology, I think, is hugely exciting for education.
Okay, absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
We want to be able to bring this session to a close, and I thank you very much for all your contributions. Just one last question from me. We mentioned it in the beginning that the Scottish Government intends to produce its plan and strategy now in the early part of 2026. So a kind of rapid-fire question to you all before we close is, what are the top 3 things that you would like to see from either or of them? Because we've had a very, very wide-ranging session here today, but what are your top 3 priorities? I know it's a difficult question, so don't anybody look away. Professor Schaffer, top 3.
The first one to look away. I'm sorry, it's just very hard to prioritise something which is so, jargon, high-dimensional. There are just so many dimensions. I think maybe what I would be looking for rather than priorities would be the characteristics of the process. So things are moving so fast that I would like to see a strategy that comes out which is inherently flexible, but also regularly reviewed and revised. So maybe there's an annual cycle for annual revisions. Things are moving so quickly that coming up with a strategy and then sitting back for 3 years is just doomed to failure, I think. So that's too.
Yeah, no, that's a good job, because I appreciate it's a difficult question.
Okay.
Heather?
I think understanding that the biggest risk is not to do anything about this, and that we need to act, and we need to act now. I think helping, as we've spoken about already, moving away from temporary grants towards investment in multi-year national skills planning, taking stock of the assets, the huge assets, nationally funded assets that we already have, and looking at how we can support them to grow and scale, as opposed to starting again and having little pockets of activity everywhere. Bringing things together, I think, is a huge thing. As we talk about, there's pockets of activity, taking a more coordinated approach so that this feels like a Team Scotland. It feels like Scotland's approach to AI, and it doesn't feel that it's kind of diluted and broken up across. And I think encouraging partnerships, stronger partnerships between public, private, academic sector, to make sure that when we are looking at innovation and skills, we're all on the same page, and that things are actually, everything's relevant.
Thank you. Stephen?
One thing, and we've not talked about it much today, is, and you asked me to be brief, I don't know how I make this brief. I would love to see us create an economic environment that attracts AI compute capacity and capability into Scotland. So how are we creating the economic environment that encourages a hyperscaler to come here? I would be proactive in building confident AI leadership in the public sector. Build on the amazing cases we have so far and decide how we want leaders to think about the opportunity that AI presents in the public sector. And then I would look at, in the world of employment and economics and apprentices and education, I would embed AI thinking. I would go back and look at every single apprenticeship right now and see how is that potentially impacted by AI and how could they use it better, so that we're not already starting with a young workforce that's already behind other countries.
Well, thank you very much. I think that brings our public session to a close, and I really do appreciate all the time you've given up this morning and all the information. Thank you very much, and that's us concluded.